as goes with regulations and laws, there is usually the letter of the law, the spirit of the law. And I think in the spirit of the law, in which is to try and get as many of these companies listed in the market, I think it's actually a very good move. Right. Kenya has a particularly unique structure. Parastatals are not a very common thing in the way that they're structured, especially here in Kenya.
Right.
And so having these companies now move from, like he said, in the darkness and get listed onto the market, and having the government require that they do this and delist from a lot of these companies, there are economists who argue that government has no role in business. It's right. to enable business, not get involved in business. And I think this creates an opportunity now for these companies to actually either become competitive, if they can be, without the support of continuous government support, and see whether they can actually compete in the market as private companies or as partially private companies. So I think it creates a good opportunity for us to actually a lot of times offload a lot of these costs that the government is actually having to run as part of its recurrent expenditure and move them out into private entities and reduce that load on the government itself. So I think there are good opportunities coming up. In terms of in the letter of the law, I am not a lawyer. I am not a jurist of any kind.
Right.
So I haven't had a chance to look at it in depth as
right.
well. Yeah.
Right, and you're a market player, so at the end of the day, I assume this, significantly impacts the way that you usually conduct your business. So now I must throw it to you, Eric. Are you in support of what he has just said, and why do you believe that the Privatization Act bill is the way to go?
Yeah, obviously we share the view that it's good, at least for the market.
Right.
Maybe it didn't kind of lessen all the because the previous regulation was quite stringent, and of course nothing was done under the previous regulation. And this one again, of course, there was a lot of concern by Parliament about what level of transparency if privatizations are happening. So they tried to lessen the challenges that were there in the previous regulation, but still at least allowed some flexibility, and hopefully we should have better traction. There's still some challenges and elements that still need oversight by Parliament. But obviously now the issue is just picking for each company and trying to see it through and how that happens. Not all privatizations might come through the stock market. So again, that's also something to watch out. But obviously we'd be happy if a lot of them come through the stock market.
Right.
Yeah.
And that, of course, opens up not only, the public sector, but also the private sector. There will be more eyes when it comes to the stock market. And more people equals more money. That's the thing with business. When it comes to the government, of course, in the bonds market, the government targets to raise a sum of around 125 billion during the quarter under review, which was last quarter 4 of last year, on the issuance of treasury bonds from the primary bonds market. Government bonds have always done very well. Nganga, why do you think this is?
Well, government is the lender of last resort. It's essentially you're lending to the institution that creates the country that we live in.
Right.
The bonds themselves, of course, typically are a bit problematic right now, because with government absorbing so much credit out of, and particularly private credit, what we are seeing is that institutions such as banks and SACCOs are finding it harder to lend, since it's just easier to give it to the government at 18% for 2 years than to try and lend it out at 19, 20% in smaller chunks, which will require a lot more management. The government bonds have always been good in the fact that the government has always ensured that they make their payments, but we have seen, of course, over the last, was it 1 year or so, or the last quarter of last year, 3 defaults, particularly on international payments. So we get a little bit worried, particularly when we see the amount of debt that's actually being held by the government, how much of it is actually being picked up by from private institutions, how much of it is actually private credit. But as investment vehicles, they're fantastic in terms of providing cash flow that's guaranteed, that will be paid out every 6 months. Treasury bills will give you your payment at the end of the period with